Hello everybody, it's so nice to be here with you today. I'm Riki Stamps, Director of Programs and Events for Butterfield Trail Village, and we have another great conversation with residents Richard and Ardith Wharry. Richard and Ardith have been residents for 12 years of Butterfield Trail Village, and they have a wonderful story. Richard and Ardith have been featured in the Life magazine, and you probably learned a lot about the two of them in that particular article. But I wanted to touch on some other things that, in all the years that I've known Richard and Ardith, the thing that resonates with me is their kind spirit. They're always helping other people. They're always in projects that benefit others. And I just think that's a story that needs to be documented and told. And I've loved watching how they have given to the community, the greater community, and the Butterfield community over the years. So I think what I'll do today is start with Richard Wharry. Richard, you just celebrated your 89th birthday. Happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you have a fun party?
Oh, we did, and it was a complete surprise.
That's what Ardith intended. So if you did know, then you're doing a good job not telling.
Oh, not only that, but none of the guests told him ahead of time. That was
Nobody
wonderful.
told me.
Those are good friends that don't give away a surprise birthday party.
It was indeed.
So Richard, you live in Fayetteville, Arkansas, but you were born in Oklahoma. Tell us about your childhood and your youth.
Well, I was born in Pond Creek, Oklahoma, which is in Grant County, Oklahoma. It's the county in Oklahoma immediately south of Wichita, Kansas. It was basically wheat country, mostly agrarian. Like I said, I was born and raised in Pond Creek. I was born in Pond Creek, and I lived there until I was in about the 5th grade or so. And World War II come along, and my father had suffered an injury playing football in high school, and he was classified 4F. He couldn't go in the Army or Navy, so they asked him to take a job that would benefit the war effort. He was a man, and men were short in the United States. And he accepted a position with the railroad up at Renfrew, Oklahoma, which is about 25, 30 miles north of where we were living at the time. I moved up there when I was about the 5th grade, 4th or 5th grade. I don't remember, that's a long time ago. But it was a one-room schoolhouse. We had about 20 kids in our 1st to the 8th grade deal, and I remember it was a kind of a fun time for me, really. I enjoyed it. And then long about time I was in the 8th grade, we moved down to Medford, and Daddy continued working in Renfrew, but we went to Medford, and I went to high school in Medford for my first 3 years. I moved in my senior year to Wellington, Kansas. Daddy got transferred because the railroad went from 6 days a week work to a 5-day work week.
And you had mentioned to me that that was in the mid to late 40s, and America was in a transition.
Yeah.
And everything because the war, after the war.
It was immediately after the war, and the unions signed a national contract for a 5-day work week. Now, that was the beginning of the 5-day work week. And I finished my senior year of high school in Wellington, and I didn't really know what to do. When I was my senior year, I worked as a pin boy and setting pins after school, and I had a lot of fun doing that. But I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I decided I wanted to go to work for the signal department of the railroad.
Okay. For us non-railroad people, what is the signal department?
Well, the signal department, the people in the signal department take care of the signals that tell the engineer how fast he can go when he has to stop. And they also take care of the bells and the lights and the flashing gate arms and that tell the people to stop as the train coming. That was the skills that we had. I wrote a letter to the signal engineer of the Rock Island Railroad and asked if I could go to work. I put in an application, and they sent me a one-way pass to Chicago and told me to come up there and fill out application and take a physical. So I went, got on a train in Wellington, rode 2 days to Chicago, and I was hired, and they asked me where I wanted to go to work at, and I chose to go to work on a signal gang at Pratt, Kansas.
Oh, I want to tell, he was a really skinny little guy then, and they wondered if he would be able to do the work.
When I got out of high school, I weighed 135 pounds, and I had about a 24-inch waist. And they wondered if I was able to handle the hard work, because there was some hard work involved. And I pointed out that between my sophomore and senior year of high school, I got a job on the section hand on the railroad, and I put in cross ties and stuff like that. I would work brittle, if you will. Anyway, I worked on the signal gang for about 9 months, and then I was promoted to assistant signalman. It's kind of an apprenticeship. In order to be a signalman or signal maintainer, it takes almost 4 years, 2 to 4 years, to learn the skills and the knowledge that you need. At the end of it, I was assistant signalman, and I was in a program where I would work with one signalman and maintainer or somebody, and they would teach me this particular style of signaling and what we did, and then I would be transferred somewhere else. And I worked for two or three different signal maintainers, 2 or 3 different jobs, until about August or September 1952. Now this is about a little over 2 years after I went to work. I bid in my first signal maintainer's job. Now the signal maintainer was assigned a stretch of railroad about 40 to 50 miles long, and he was responsible for the testing, the inspection, the adjusting, repair, replacement, whatever had to be done to keep the system working. He was responsible for all those activities. I had to plan ahead, order the proper material and the tools, have on hand when it was necessary. And I did this all by myself. Each maintainer worked alone. My first job was out in the high desert country of New Mexico, and I could go to work in the morning and not see another living soul to talk to till 5 o'clock that evening.
Ouch.
The only time they would send somebody to help me is if I had a train wreck or maybe a tornado or an ice storm, something that required a lot of help.
Was this particular job with the with the railroad company that you went to see in Chicago?
They're right.
So no other lines were using that track?
I went to work for the Rock Island Railroad, and I worked for them for 27 years.
Oh, okay.
I worked for the first 19 as a signalman or signal maintainer. I had signal maintainer jobs in about 5 or 6 different locations. My last signal maintaining position was in Wellington, Kansas, and at that time I was appointed to a supervisory position. And I spent the next 8 years with the railroad in a supervisory role. My last position on the railroad was Division Supervisor of Signal Communications for the Missouri, Kansas. It stretched from Des Moines to St. Louis to Kansas City to Tucumcari, New Mexico. And in 1976, the railroad was involved in a merger situation with the Southern Pacific and the Union Pacific. And I was scheduled to go to work for the Southern Pacific. Now, the Southern Pacific signal engineer had specifically asked me if I would go to his staff in San Francisco. I said, no, I don't want to do that. But I was afraid that once I went to work for the Southern Pacific as a supervisor, he assured me that I would be the supervisor in Kansas City. But I knew that once I went to work, he could transfer me, and I couldn't do anything about it. So along about that time, late in 1976, I was approached by a member of the Federal Railroad Administration there in Kansas City, the supervisor, and offered a position in St. Louis as an inspector accident investigator. And on January the 3rd, 1977, I resigned my position from the railroad and went to work for the Federal Railroad Administration in St. Louis. I spent 2 years as an inspector in St. Louis. Then I was promoted to a supervisory position in Kansas City for 2 years. And then I was again promoted to the Washington staff in D.C.,
Oh, okay.
the Federal Railroad Administration staff in D.C., whereas my title was safety supervisor or something to that effect. And I worked there for 4 years. I handled block signal applications and various items. And during that period of time, 1982, I believe it was, I was approached and asked to go to Saudi Arabia to assist the Saudi government railroad in the planning for a new railroad across the desert. In detail, actually, I was detailed to the State Department, and I went over and helped them plan a new railroad from Dammam to Riyadh across what they called the empty quarter. And 2 years later, a year later, it might have been 2 years, I don't think it was about a year, I was asked to come back and help pick the winners of the bids that they had put out to install the equipment. After 4 years in D.C., I decided I didn't really want to live in Washington, D.C. any longer. That was enough. And I told them when I went up there I did not want to stay. Normally when you went on the headquarters staff, that's where you stayed till you retired. I didn't want that. I had 2 sons. They were finished college about the time I was in D.C. They were both research chemists, and they lived in Ponca City, Oklahoma, and Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And I didn't want to live in D.C. So I told them I wanted to leave. Well, they wouldn't let me have the job I wanted, but they said they had this job that they wanted me to take as a training instructor and accident investigator. And they would place me anywhere in the nation I wanted to live because my territory was going to be the continental United States. Well, because I was going to have to fly from coast to coast, I told them I would like to live in either Kansas City or Fort Worth because that's in the middle of the country and you can go either way.
Right.
Well, they sent me to Fort Worth, and I spent the next 8 years as a training instructor and accident investigator and generally go-to guy when they needed something to do, something special. I oversaw and helped do surveys of a couple of short line railroads and some entities that was having problems, and we needed to do some things for them. After 8 years of that, I bid in and I asked to be assigned to the job as supervisory position in Fort Worth, and that's where I ended my career. In 1993, exactly 20 days to the day that I went to work for the Federal Administration, I retired to Bella Vista. Now, we chose Bella Vista. We didn't talk about this, but we chose Bella Vista. Carolyn and I looked all over. We went to Georgetown, Texas, and we went to several places in Texas. And we come up to Arkansas to look, and I was told about Bella Vista. We didn't know about Bella Vista. So we come on up. It was in October, I think, and my wife wanted to buy a house. Then, October, I says, no, I don't want to buy a house in October. This is in 95. I want to see what it looks like in the winter. So we come up in February 96, and we looked at it. and we found a house we like, but it was built by the village plumber, and what he did was build a house, live in it 2 years, sell it, and go build him another house. And he said, well, I'd like to sell it, but I don't want to sell it right now. We'll have an August closing. Would it be all right if we delay? Yeah, well, this is February. Well, yeah, okay. So we bought the house with an August closing. Well, I went back home to Fort Worth. We put our home up for sale, and I figured, well, if it sells by sometime in late August or September, it'll work out. Well, it worked out that somebody come in from Salt Lake City with Hughes Electronics, and they needed the house by the first day of June. So we sold my house, but I didn't have any place to live. So I had to rent an apartment and work another 6 months. And that's why we actually moved to Bella Vista on August 1st, 1996. But I did not retire until 97. I commuted between Fort Worth and Bella Vista, and I traveled all the time anyway, so it really didn't matter where I lived. I'd go back to Fort Worth, but I might fly out to Atlanta, Georgia, or some other place. So it didn't matter where I lived. Anyway, we finally retired on January 3rd, 1997. And I started playing golf and playing bridge.
And bowling.
And living it up.
And bowling.
And bowling.
And
Now,
bowling.
I bowled, we had Bella Vista had a bowling team in Rogers, and I bowled on it. I think I bowled about twice a week, played golf a couple or 3 times a week. I played duplicate bridge on Monday night. Every Monday night we played duplicate bridge. In the meantime, I cut timber and fought the forest of Bella Vista.
I know it. Well, we're glad you made it all over the country and wound up almost here, but Bella Vista ahead of Butterfield. But I want to circle back just for a minute. As a railroad accident investigator, you witnessed some horrific accidents.
Yes, I did.
Would you just go over maybe the 2 that stands out in your memory the most, and go through a little of how you felt like you could determine the cause of these crashes, train wrecks?
Well, I guess one of them was I was on a survey of a railroad company, and they told me they called me and asked if I was on a high rail truck. We was going down the hill and road, and they told me to call Washington, and they told me that there'd been a rear-end collision at Hudson, New York, between 2 commuter trains. The only person who was killed was the driver, but they wanted me to go to Hudson, New York immediately. And that would involve one commuter train running into the rear of another.
How did you decide what the problem was?
Well, the problem was the train that the train that did the running into was an empty train, and the driver was killed, the operator was killed, but he was killed in the cab and with the controls in the full run position and no indications of brakes ever put on. And it was determined by an autopsy that he was under the influence of some drugs, and we assumed that he just didn't know what he was doing. Another one, a bad one, the worst one I ever saw was 2 trains collided head on. One train was coming up the hill at 20 miles an hour, preparing to go into the siding to pass another train. The other train going east was going downhill, and he was supposed to stop on the main track and wait for the second train to go into the siding, but he didn't. It was sometime in the midnight, 1 o'clock, real late in the night. He went by the red signal. He went through the switch that was set in the wrong direction. We could tell that because he damaged the switch points. The switch rods were all bent and everything. He went through it and the switch in the wrong position, and the two engines collided at a closing speed of 75 miles an hour. There were 4 locomotives on each train. All 4 locomotives were destroyed by the collision and fire. All 4 crew members were killed. We could never interview anybody to see what happened, but we surmised that they could have gone to sleep. The one that was going down the hill at 55, the one coming up the hill at 20, he was clearly in right because he was preparing to go into the siding at 20 miles an hour. The one going down the hill should have stopped about 1.5 miles back. It was, we don't know exactly, we never knew what happened, but we did find out the NTSB learned that he had cancer, and he was accepting treatment down in Mexico for some drugs that the railroad didn't know about. And if the railroad had known he was taking these drugs, they would not have permitted him to operate the locomotive. But it's again, we never knew because everybody was gone. But that was the worst one I went to.
And you, in our pre-conversation about your work as an investigator, you are very much aware of a lot of people who lost their lives.
Well, I wouldn't say I was the chief investigator. I was just part of a team. Mm-hmm. But yes, there was an Amtrak wreck at Chase, Maryland, where Amtrak run into a locomotive who come out of the siding in front of them, and Amtrak was traveling 120 miles an hour. People lost their lives. A lot of people were injured. Again, that involved drugs in that instance also. But
that's really fast, 120 miles an
well,
hour.
we didn't know it at the time. That the drug thing all came in later when they did tests on the whatever. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really enjoy accident investigation.
I know that had to be tough,
Yeah,
but someone had to do it, and you had to be able to put the pieces together to figure out what were the causes and how those type of accidents could be avoided in the future.
Yeah.
So that is very important work that you were doing, Richard, very important.
The first thing we did when we do is take a lot of pictures. I know I was the chief investigator on one early in my career at Pinckneyville, Missouri, just south end of Missouri. And the first thing we do is take a lot of pictures of everything, and then we have to make a drawing of the wreck site where everything landed and stayed. You have to show where the box cars and everything is. You have to make a big drawing of it. And then you put the pieces together and try to figure out what happened. One in Pinckneyville, I'm quite sure we figured out the guys went to sleep.
Uh-oh.
My. Well, I appreciate you circling back around on your career with railroad, because those are the jobs that are not front and center for a lot of us civilians. And I think it's important that we understand the severity of what some people had to deal with and to try to help keep our railroads safe. And you contributed to that for many, 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 many years. I almost ask you if you just lived out of a suitcase your entire life before you landed in Bella Vista. It sounded like you moved around a lot.
Well, the first 2 years on the railroad, I moved constantly. When I was on the gang, we moved every 3 or 4 weeks, and we went from South Texas all the way up to the Minnesota line, and I worked as far into Chicago and as far west as almost to Denver, up to Minneapolis, and all the way down to Houston. But
you were a true American.
I was a true traveler. But after I been in my maintaining job for the next, about 19 years, well, I was pretty stable because I had a maintainer job and I was home every night and I didn't have to go anywhere. And it wasn't until I became a supervisor that I started traveling again. And then, of course, when I went to work for the government, that was a traveling job also. And my first job in St. Louis, I tried to arrange my life so that I worked out of town a week and in town a week. That way, at least I got kept acquainted with my wife.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad that you landed and unpacked your suitcase in Bella Vista, which was just prior to you becoming a resident at Butterfield. Again, I've repeated this, you guys have been residents for 12 years. I feel like I've known you for so much longer.
I know.
Because our paths have crossed so much here at the village. And again, you both have contributed so much to the happiness of Butterfield in so many different ways. But I was talking to Richard about a newfound hobby that he loves, and that is his woodwork. And he dabbled with it a little bit. From what I understand, you remodeled an older home, a 1927 Victorian home in Kansas, correct?
Yeah, it was about 1967, I guess. I've been in a signal maintainer job in Wellington the last month, and I bought an old house there that was built in 1927. I know that to be a fact because when I looked at the vents coming off of the old furnace, they had an old, it used to be a coal furnace, but there was an inspector's station on it. There was an inspector's sticker that said been inspected in 1927. So I knew how old the house was. I had to completely rewire the house, and that's when I started doing some serious woodworking. I had to do a lot of work. I opened up the closets and made folding doors and stuff like that. I did a lot of work on that old house. We lived in it 2 years before the supervisor said, "Richard, you're now my supervisor. Go to Liberal, Kansas tomorrow morning." And then I sold the house and started my career there. But the woodworking, I really never did much woodworking when I was working as a supervisor of the railroad government because I traveled all the time.
Right.
I did a little bit in different places to repair.
He tells me that when he lived out in Washington D.C. area, that he and some neighbors got together, and there are several houses that have wonderful decks out there.
Yeah,
Wonderful
yes.
decks.
When I was in D.C., my neighbor decided he wanted, I wanted a deck on the back of my house. I bought a home in D.C. in a place called Cub Run Estates in Chantilly. And it had a little deck on the back that was about 5 feet wide and 10 feet long. And I decided I wanted a full deck, so I got my boss to help me, Mr. Stotts, and a couple of neighbors, and we built a nice big deck. Well, the neighbor looked at it and said, "You know, I'd kind of like to have a deck like that too." We wound up building 3 decks.
There you go.
And we'd sit down and how big do you want it? We'd draw it all out and we'd figure out how much material. We'd get all the material together, and we'd get about 6 guys, and we'd build that deck in the day.
So
Wow.
he says he didn't do any woodworking, but he did.
You
He really did.
definitely,
Big time.
absolutely. You were working on your craft, and as you became a resident of Butterfield, I know you were a magnet to the woodwork shop that we enjoy
Yes, he
here
was.
on campus.
When we moved here and I saw the woodworking shop, I decided I was going to do some more.
And did you ever, and I do not remember this particular incident, but Richard reminded me of this earlier. We had the lodge built around 2009.
I don't remember.
Were you guys here in 2009? It was around 2009 that the lodge was complete. Well, we had a large storage room, but it was just open and had a slab and a light switch. And we needed shelving to house decor, linens, things that we would be using in the lodge that we could lock up for safety. And Richard said I asked if he could build shelves.
Yeah.
And boy, did you build shelves.
Well, yeah. You asked me if I could build some shelves in there for you. You said they had ordered you some steel shelves, but they were so flimsy you was afraid to use them.
Exactly.
So I drew it out and figured out what I wanted to do, and I cut all the pieces I cut all the pieces, measured and cut everything, and they're in the woodworking shop, and we used the pickup of the BTV's pickup and pulled it over there, and I put it all together.
You said Jim Ferguson helped you?
Jim Ferguson helped me, and there was somebody else, I don't remember who else. There was two guys come in and kind of helped me put it together. Some of those pieces I had to have some help to lift it into place.
2x4s, 2x6s, I believe. for the
It's sturdy
shelving.
enough, it will last.
These shelves will be there when we're all gone, because Richard did such an amazing job to build those shelves. And he has always answered the call. I don't know if you've done projects for other Butterfield staff, other residents, but every time I've asked you to do something that I feel like would benefit the residents, you've always come through. When the board approved the new construction of the new addition here, the performance hall, front lobby, reception area, we had a temporary reception area located at the elevator of the north wing. Installed a temporary automated door, and the receptionist with her phones and the security, everything was set right there. But of course, receptionists have all these supplies and different things that help residents throughout the day. So I wanted a cabinet that we could lock. Well, I started pricing those to just go to Lowe's or Office Depot to purchase, and the price was outrageous. So I just called Richard, and before I knew it, he had built an amazing cabinet with lockable doors. And it was huge.
Yeah, it was a nice
Yeah.
cabinet, really.
Very nice cabinet. And I know there are probably other things, but many of our residents have been so kind to share their personal collections in the resident display cases that are by the chapel. And I find myself needing risers and things to display certain items at different levels. So I approached Richard about these particular shelves, and he also built some quilt racks of sort that didn't have tall legs on them, that we could fit in these display cases, because a lot of times we'll put artist quilts or different resident fabric pieces in there. I think I have a picture of Richard with the small tables he built so we could display things in the display cases. I think we have it.
His most recent, or his latest large item is in the library, underneath the windows.
I made a cabinet for the library. The library committee gets new books every month.
Oh, you're
And
showing a picture.
We used to put them on the shelves, but people would come in and take them off the shelves. They weren't ready to be read, but they took them off the shelf, and they wanted a way to lock them up. So I built them a cabinet that they had a lock on it. They could put them up, so that only after we got through processing could the people take them out.
So the word was out, and the library committee called you and put you to work.
Oh,
The library committee put me to work.
Library committee's glad to have him.
Well, and I want to touch on a couple of other things here on stage. When I visited the Wharrys in their apartment, I learned of some other projects that Richard had worked on that I was unaware of. Nathan, you want to see these on the screen, please? I have to admit, I have no idea how to play cribbage, but I want Richard to explain how he has made these beautiful cribbage boards.
Well, this is a cribbage board. It's used to keep score in the game of cribbage. It's a card game played by two people. It's a very good game for people who, you're isolated and you don't have anything. The wife, Carolyn, and I used to play cribbage when we lived in New Mexico, because it was 45 miles to the nearest motion picture. We couldn't go to show. And this particular one is made out of a maple, and it's inset with cherry and walnut. I made another one out of cherry and one out of walnut.
Beautiful.
And they've inset, and then I built little pegs, and there's a little drawer in the bottom of it that holds the pegs.
That's
And,
fun.
It's just something that, I don't know, I got started and said, hey, I enjoy making those. And these little things here
Tell
are,
us what these are.
Ardith, you can explain what these are.
Oh, this is for someone who sews, and if, when you turn a collar, you want to push it out into a point. So this is a pointer, and then this end. Sometimes you don't want an iron out, but you want a crease, a temporary crease, and so this end creases it. Well, it's called a thingamajig.
A thingamajig.
A thingamajig. And so I purchased one, and then he said, "Oh, I kind of like that idea.
I
Wonder if I can
thought it'd
make
be
some."
kind of fun to make a few of them, so I
So he
did.
made some.
I made enough that when next time she gets to meet with her quilts group, if she ever does, I told her to take them and give them away.
There you go.
So they all have a thingamajig.
Nathan, can you zoom in again, please? I want to show you this little thingamajog.
Give me a piece of paper and I'll explain it. I didn't invent this. John Dusterman made the first one, and it took me a while to figure out how John did it. You have to make a slanting groove in the wood, and it took me a while to figure out how to do it. But it's a little recipe holder or a paper holder. You can just put the knob over your counter door and put the paper up in there, and it will hold it, and it won't come out, but you can pull it out sideways.
And what is on the inside? Is it a marble?
It's a little marble in a slot that slants. And
Okay.
that's what holds the paper and the marble against the wood.
So you can hang this on your doorknob.
On the cabinet
on the
doorknob,
cabinet
yeah.
doorknob. Put your note or your recipe in there, and
And
it won't fall
it's
out.
at eye level.
And then when you're
get
finished,
ready,
you
just pull it out
pull it
sideways.
sideways. Okay, so are you taking orders on these today?
Well, I got to start, and it's an interesting project how to make that sloping groove. And I made 3 or 4 of them. I just made 3 or 4 of them at once, maybe 5 or 6. I don't know how many, but I made a bunch of them, and every once in a while I'll put one together.
Well, it's one of those things you just like, I cannot understand how that works, but it works.
I know. And when you put the paper in, you try and pull it out, pulling down, and it
You'll
won't
rip
come.
it. Yeah, exactly. All right, I think this is my favorite piece I want to show you. This is,
I decided to make a TV tray, but I didn't want it to be an active tray. But I made it just like an ordinary TV tray. It opens up and it sets up just like an ordinary TV tray, except it has a chessboard top.
so you can play chess or checkers while you're watching TV.
Yep. Or if you don't want to do that, you can just set your drink on there. It's varnished. It's made out of maple and walnut, and it's varnished, and it will stand up to putting a drink on it if you want to.
And the 2 different colors of wood help define the checkers.
That's right. The checkerboard is made out of walnut and maple, and the surrounding is oak.
Well, it's absolutely gorgeous.
It was an interesting project just to see if I could figure out how to make the legs work.
Well, did you write notes so somebody else could figure it out?
Oh, no, it's all in his head.
Is it?
It's all in
Okay.
his head.
Well, the last thing I want to point out, Richard's contributed so many things to Butterfield, but I think one of the most notable contributions Richard has done over the years is he has taken on a personal project of refurbishing the benches located around our Butterfield campus along the sidewalks.
13.
13
There's 13 of them.
benches. I'm going to show this. It's just a little snapshot of Richard working in the wood shop on the benches. I'm sure you recognize. No matter what type of varnish you use, Richard was telling me the sun is relentless.
Yeah, I think there's 13 of them. I did every one of them at least twice. I think some of them 3 times. And I used the very best marine varnish I could get, marine spar varnish. But the sun just destroys the varnish. I don't know how the world it is. I guess the only thing you can do is paint them if you want to, but I like to varnish myself. I think they're pretty when they're varnished.
They are very pretty, and we appreciate you keeping those up for us to walk around and enjoy. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So, Miss Ardith,
All right,
I adore your story. I don't want to talk about you now.
all right.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood and coming up through your education and what your first career was.
I was born in Peru, Illinois, and lived in LaSalle, Illinois. LaSalle and Peru are just separated by a bridge across a ravine, so they're just next door neighbors, which is in northern Illinois. I believed everybody had wonderful soil because that's what was around me. It was it's corn country up there. I lived out in the country until I was in second grade. Went to a one-room schoolhouse then. And incidentally, the one-room schoolhouse is now a home.
Oh, how sweet.
It's still in existence, and the tree is still there. Wonderful. Then we moved into town, to the north edge of town, and I didn't tell you this part of it, but the house we lived in, I think in those days before we purchased it, it probably had been an elegant house. It had all of the attachments that went with elegant living, but we weren't elegant livers. My folks bought 4.5 acres, lived there until I was through high school. But in that house, during the war, there weren't motels, and they converted the upstairs to an apartment. They closed off half of the living room, and it became sleeping quarters for sort of like a B&B for workers that traveled around. There was a trailer in the pear orchard, and a recruiter from Louisiana lived there with his family. So I lived in a village. And then there had been a summer kitchen. In the olden days, they had a summer kitchen as opposed to a kitchen in the house. And that had been converted to an apartment. So I could never really do anything wrong because somebody always told. But so we had a community there, but we had 4.5 acres. There was a lot of crime in the area, and the best way, my folks, I learned later, they decided the best way to keep us out of trouble was to keep us busy. So that 4.5 acres grew all of our food, and all of that food was grown not with mechanical equipment. It was grown with children taking care of it. So we always had chores. We had animals, we had the garden, and we always had chores to do. So that kept us out of the pool room, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Lived there through high school. My dad was a history teacher, and as I got the message, he was a stern teacher. So it was always fun to see if you could get the teacher's kids in trouble. And in that town, the teacher's kids and the preacher's kids were a fair game for getting them into trouble. I was fortunate in that I did things with the group at church, and through doing things with the group at church, I began to travel the state. So my friends didn't have to be the school friends, and that was good because then they couldn't get me into trouble. So that was high school, and went to a small college in southern Illinois, Carlinville, Blackburn College. It's a self-help college, and everyone was expected to work 15 hours a week. Then after got married while I was in college, my husband had a telephone career, which took him up and down the state of Illinois. And I thought it was interesting, every time we moved, the mob was always in the next town south. It was never the town you lived in, but no matter how far south we lived in Illinois, the mob was always the next town south. And
So the mob was not just in the city of Chicago.
no. I thought that was interesting. So I became a school teacher and worked in the grade school level. And after the first 2 years of that, I thought, perhaps if I learned a little bit more about the children and their styles of learning, I would be a better teacher. So I did my master's work in special education, always assuming I'd go back to the self-contained classroom, but I never did. After that, I was always in special ed. But because we moved around a lot, it wasn't always convenient to have a teaching job. So, I worked in a library, did different aspects of library work. I worked in a church as a secretary, and I was the money counter for a big church. That was fun.
Yeah.
I was a telemarketer. I was fortunate in that the telemarketing group I worked for, we didn't just call a list. We always checked the list to be sure that we were reaching potential customers. So I was a telemarketer. What else did I do? I worked as a retail clerk, just a variety of things. And
All life lessons to bring you up to where you were.
oh, absolutely. And absolutely. And my last job was at Bella Vista, and I worked in the church. I can't remember what my title was, but I was supposed to kind of keep tabs on the pulse of the congregation and help get things started, help the congregation folks if there was something amiss, alert the pastor, help him figure out things. If the pastor wasn't there, I was called on. I do remember one occasion when I received a phone call and was asked to go to this house I did not know the people. And I was really, really cautious about it. No one else was available to go. And the best advice they could give me was, we will stop right now and say a prayer for you. There you go.
Did it work?
It worked. It happened to be a parental abuse situation. It was a bad situation. But you think about child abuse, but in Bella Vista, with the retired folks, you also thought about parental abuse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
Well, before you moved to Bella Vista, at one point you lived in St. Louis.
oh yes, I lived in St. Louis.
And you shared with me that you became ill.
I did.
But what came out of not only complete wellness, what came out of that illness?
Well, when you're ill and you have all of these myriad doctor appointments and they're ongoing, you think, what can I do to distract myself? What can I do? And I had never tried quilting. There were many quilt stores in the St. Louis area, so I thought, wonder if I would like quilting. And it interested me enough to keep me going and not thinking about all my appointments. So then I started that in 1989. And then we moved to Bella Vista in 1990. And when I was at Bella Vista, I went to Reardon Hall to work on one of my quilts. You need a lot of space sometimes.
Absolutely.
And so the manager at Reardon Hall was, I'm sure, always looking for new things. And she came in and she said, there's some people here in the village who would like to learn how to quilt. Will you teach them? And I thought, I've been a teacher. I certainly know how to make lesson plans. I'm well versed in that. I do enjoy this quilting that I'm doing. Yes, I think I will.
I love it.
I think I can do that. So they put some information out, and 22 people showed up the first time. And they informed me early on, Ardith, we don't want to make a quilt. We want to know if we want to quilt. And we don't want, at that time, the big thing was to make a sampler quilt. And each block would be a sample of something you would learn. And we don't want something for the walls because we've just moved from a big house. So I thought, okay, what can I do? So I decided I would create a course of placemats. And with
just the right size.
And just the right size. And I thought, if I have a series of placemats, each placemat can show a different technique. I can make that lesson plan easily. So, so there's this lesson plan, and then there's this lesson plan, and then there's a lesson plan on this. Am I going too fast? I hope not.
Can you
And
zoom
then-
in, please?
And then there's a lesson plan on curves. They hated the curves.
Let's hold some of these up.
Okay.
The thing about it, if at a table for 4 or 6, you have placemats, and
Right.
what she's teaching is
The
you
different techniques.
the different techniques.
Right. But so each placemat had the same colors, but this dealt with curves.
Yes.
This dealt with triangles. This is a quick way, showing a quick way to make a star. And if you did the star in different fabrics, it comes out like this is the same star. Doesn't look like it.
Yes, it's just like
So anyway,
reversed.
I made a series of 6 placemats, and I thought, oh, I can do that. So I did that, and I thought, well, now I'm done. And then Bella Vista at that time always knew people moving in, always knew people wondering if they wanted to quilt. And I probably have made 60 sets of placemats, because each time I would make a set of placemats with them. And so it turned out to be that they'd say, wonder if I'd like to quilt. And they'd say, well, take Ardith's quilt placemat class first, and then you'll know whether you want to do that or not. So I had a
how
lot of
fun.
It was a great way to meet people. I remember these 2 young ladies. Now at that time, Bella Vista was mostly retirees. These 2 gals came, young, and they were from New Jersey. Their husbands worked for Johnson & Johnson, and they had been assigned to work here for Walmart. And they said, when we moved out here, it was like, Arkansas? Where's Arkansas? What's Arkansas like? And so they were bored, and they wanted something to do, and they came to that class, and they immediately had 10 mothers.
Love it.
And so anyway, but as I got into quilting, okay, if I continue on?
Yes, please.
As I got into quilting, I thought, I really like this. And then someone showed me a book of quilt patterns. And I flipped through that, and I thought, people made quilts for occasions, like anniversaries or weddings and things like that. And then I looked through the index, and I thought, oh, look, there are a lot of things made just for specific things that happen in the United States. I wonder how many I could find. So I went through the index, and I've created a talk, sort of a review of American history. As I found these quilt patterns, I then reviewed my history and learned a lot of interesting things, like in the Spanish-American War, for instance. In the Spanish-American War, Teddy Roosevelt was the Assistant Secretary of Navy at that time. And he wanted so much to be involved in this war, he resigned his position so he could become part of the war effort. And we all, those of us who know the history, think of the Rough Riders, Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough
Yes.
Riders. Well, that was during that war, the Spanish and American War. So anyway, these patterns deal with, this is the Spanish fleet, and this is Manila Bay, and this is, no,
Let me hold this.
okay,
Here, get up there and show us.
okay. This is the Spanish fleet, this is Manila Bay, and this is the Philippines.
Okay.
And so what they used to do is they would create a pattern for the occasion, and other women would like that pattern, and then they would pick it up and create that pattern. It was always that name. Now, and so this one is called, you've draped this one, which is really nice. This one is called Order Number 11, and this one deals with a time in our Civil War time, and deals with an incident that happened in the western part of Missouri. So there's a good story that goes along with that.
Absolutely.
And then this one, this is a fun one. This is called orange peel.
Orange peel.
Orange peel. This deals with the Revolutionary time, and one of the reasons this girl, I have a story about this one, and after the girl created this, people liked it. It was a two-color pattern, which a lot of women liked, and so a lot of people began making this. So this has been an interesting part, and I have probably about 20 of those that
Well, and that's a segue into me sharing with the audience that I've invited you to do
Yes.
an American History quilt presentation in May. And so,
and I'll show the rest of them, and I'll tell you the stories about these.
yes,
Yes.
that's wonderful.
Yes.
And you were giving this presentation as far back as,
Well, let's
Bella
see.
Vista?
Well, let's see. Probably in 95, I probably developed this. I would just look up the pattern, and I'd study the history. That was a great way for me to review history. It
No
was
doubt.
a great way for me to review history. And it deals with I did just the American history ones. But there are lots of other patterns. Yeah.
well, I just love the fact that there is actual solid history about this American art form. And
Yes.
you really have caused me to be very interested to learning, and I'm sure many of our residents will want to attend this presentation, so be looking to your May calendar for that date. So Ardith, many of us know Ardith her quilt talents are unbelievable, and we've enjoyed many of her quilts being displayed during our own art craft shows that we've had here at Butterfield. And I'm talking huge quilts, lap quilts, small, pieces, wall hangings, and other residents have done some beautiful work as well. But you're synonymous with quilting. I mean, that's
Well,
basically.
But I need to interject and say, many of the quilters that we have here are far better than I am, and so we just need to find theirs too, because
And we want to always highlight our other quilt artists
yes, please.
here at Butterfield, absolutely. But the fact that you're so passionate about the history and you know this and you're willing to, with your teaching experience, share that with the layperson who wouldn't understand it, I think will make it a lot of fun.
It will be.
And I obviously have some samples of her lap quilts here. But when you were in Bella Vista, this was almost 15 years ago, you kind of started working on scrap quilting that were eventually turned into sleeping bags for the homeless.
Right.
And I think that's how your first relationship came to be with Seven Hills.
Yes.
And Seven Hills used to be called the Seven Hills Homeless Shelter. Now it's called Seven Hills Homeless Center. They can't spend the night, but they can go in every day for a hot meal. They have lockers. They can take showers. They can hang out if it's really cold and watch TV. A lot of great opportunities there at this center. What that means, if they're homeless, when it's time to go home at the end of the day, they retreat back to tents.
Or just the woods.
Or just the woods in Fayetteville because they have no place to go. And the kind and giving spirit I spoke of earlier, it resonates with artists' desire. And I don't know if you had friends that you pulled in to help with this project or you made them yourself, but tell us just a little bit about Seven Hills.
Well, Seven Hills, you were sharing what they have at that facility. There's a person named Kevin Fitzpatrick.
He's not with Seven Hills.
Well, but
Or is he connected with them in some format?
I'm not sure just how that Kevin Kirkpatrick, he's interested in the homeless.
Okay, exactly.
And through his work, I'm not sure who all he works with. Actually, he's a professor at the university, but he's really involved with the homeless, cares a lot about them. And so he's wrapped up. There's the 7 Hills for the homeless. Then there's a place called Safe Camp. And then there's a group called New Beginnings. And New Beginnings is going to be opening soon, April or May, he thinks, perhaps. And everyone's going to have, what did you call it? Their new home. Their new home. It's a 100 square foot building, and it will be their home, temporary, in that they're expected to save up enough money with their jobs that they're having, and then move on to and get money for their own personal things and move on to an apartment. But they're going to have 20 of those. And there's going to be a huge double-wide building. Wouldn't you say it's a double-wide, Richard?
I'd say it was, yeah.
A huge
communal bathroom,
kitchen, and living room.
Shower and kitchen.
But the pod or little
home
pods is for one person,
It's
correct?
for one person.
Okay.
And they're scattered around. He told me they have 4 acres. They're scattered around the 4 acres. And so I thought, well, I've collected fabric. I was one of those people who would collect. I'll buy 3 yards because I might make that someday. Well, well, I have a lot of fabric, and so now I've gotten interested in scrap quilts because I need to do something with it,
From what I understand, you've had several residents donate scraps.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And people have donated scraps. So during this pandemic, we cannot gather together to do the ugly quilts for the homeless. There are 15 ladies who come and help with that, and Richard helps too.
Yeah, I help too.
Oh, and Lloyd Seaton has helped once or twice.
Yay, I love it.
And so I thought, this is their first step from being homeless in a tent on the ground. That's their first step to a permanent residence. And maybe they would like to have their own personal quilt. And if you make it a lap quilt, then it can fit, it can fit most any situation.
Right.
So
I'm going to grab one of these, so keep
so
talking.
I looked at my scraps and I said, let's see what I can do with this. And so I have now 21 of these made, and they will go to this project.
So not large enough for a bed quilt, obviously, but a lap quilt.
Yes.
You can sit down and cover your legs and watch TV.
Absolutely. So that would keep you nice and toasty warm. I love it.
And so that's what it is. It's all from that. So, yeah.
Well,
So may I mention one more thing about New Beginnings?
Yes, please.
I found out that I don't know who, some of you already have this information, I'm sure, but on April 8th, should you contribute to some of these organizations that are on this list, whatever you contribute that day will be matched by an anonymous donor. So I do that for 7 Hills. So I'm waiting to make my contribution to 7 Hills for April 8th. And then that will be matched by somebody. Isn't that good?
That is awesome.
I don't know who does that. And I don't know if it's just Fayetteville, but I do know that it does occur on April 8th.
Well, both organizations have done so much for the homeless in Northwest Arkansas. They don't service just Fayetteville.
Right.
They help Northwest Arkansas. And I know you can go to the websites of 7 Hills Homeless Center, 7 Hills Center, and as well as New Beginnings, and learn all of the wonderful things these organizations are doing. But it's, volunteers and different projects like this help keep some sort of normalcy with these individuals and families until they can get back on their feet. And that's the whole point of the quilts, a new shelter to keep them dry, warm, cool, whatever they need until they get a job and get themselves back in society.
Right.
So these are absolutely amazing.
And
But
each one of the quilts is different. It's like, I go to the shelves and say, what can I do with this?
one of the most precious things about this project is artist's foresight to know that there are 20 pods that will be available. But she made 21 lap quilts so that each individual
We'll have a choice.
will have a choice of which lap quilt they want for their new home, their new temporary home.
Yes.
So I think it's just so precious, and many of us may have caught KNWA's news story. They featured you, and we had a wonderful picture that will also be featured in the next magazine. And
Oh, good.
with all of these 21 lap quilts spread out on a table, it is quite the show.
It's very colorful,
Absolutely.
very colorful.
Well, I appreciate you both so much being with us today. I want to share, close today's program with one story that I've not visited with you about, but I would like, if you would, to
What do you
please
think?
share
What do you think?
I know, I'm gonna blush.
share your love story
Well, Okay.
about you.
I told you that my job at Bella Vista was in the church, and I was sort of just to feel the pulse of the congregation, and I was to help out in a lot of aspects. I got better acquainted with him at Carolyn's funeral because I would take care of all arrangements for funerals at church.
Well, now, we knew each other before then.
Yes, we did. Through Newman Neighbors.
Well, if you remember right, you and your husband and Ardith and Earl and Carolyn and Richard played in the
We
church
played cards.
bridge marathon.
Yes, we did.
And you and Earl came to my house to play bridge.
Right? That we did. That we did.
But anyway, let her finish the story.
So I was working at church one day, and I came out of church, and he was sitting outside and looking really mournful. And I would go on Friday afternoons over to Branchwood and play golf, just on my own, because I was trying to improve my golf game. And he looked really lonesome, and I said, I go play golf on Friday afternoon. Would you like to go along? And he said, oh, yeah, I would. And so I think we talked more than we played golf, but we did do the 9 hills.
We walked the nine
nine
holes,
hills.
and we did a lot of talking.
And so by the end of that first game, I thought, well, yes, this is a nice fellow, and perhaps I'd like to visit with him some more. Now, those of us who became widows in Bella Vista would get together, and our comment to each other was, we've been through first marriages, and we've all seen some tough times. Let's not do this again if somebody needs a nurse or a purse. And I decided Richard didn't need a nurse, and he didn't need a purse. So yes, I'll visit with him again.
So I asked her out, and she accepted.
So then we started dating. But I asked him if he'd like to travel because I wanted to do some traveling, and fortunately he said yes.
You know, she asked me if I like to travel. I've been on a job where I travel all the time. I get kind of tired of it, to be honest. But yes, I like to travel, and I told her.
Well, it's different when you go with
I
artists.
told her, all my traveling was done for business, and I like to travel and we did. And when we got married, we did travel.
And so our second big travel was 40 days. We decided if we could stay together 40 days and 40 nights, it would probably work.
Well, evidently it did. Well, I think you are just a precious couple. Y'all just compliment each other so much, and I can tell you're in love, and I think that's so sweet, and we just appreciate everything that you've contributed to the greater Northwest Arkansas community, as well as the Butterfield community. We're very
Thank you.
lucky to have you as residents.
We're glad to be here.
Thank you
We're
so
glad
much.
to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We hope you have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next month. I'll be interviewing Louis Epley.